The Middle East is once again in a regional war following the US and Israeli strikes on Iran. Attacks that several European leaders, including France's president and foreign minister, have suggested were carried out outside international law. The strikes came hours after mediators in Oman said negotiations had made significant progress towards resolving the long-running dispute over Iran's nuclear enrichment program. According to Omani officials, a diplomatic breakthrough may have been within reach before the military escalation derailed those talks. The conflict now threatens to spread across the Gulf, placing the Strait of Hormuz, global energy markets, and the security of several states in the region at risk. It also raises fundamental questions about whether diplomacy with Iran can still be revived after the collapse of negotiations. To understand how France views the escalation, the legality of the strikes, and the prospects for diplomacy, we spoke to a diplomat working at the centre of these tensions. With me today is Nabil Hajlaoui, the French ambassador to Oman. Ambassador Hajlaoui has more than 25 years of diplomatic experience. He previously served as France's ambassador to Tanzania, headed the East Africa Department of the Quai d'Orsay, and was consul general in Alexandria. His extensive experience dealing with terrorists and regional issues across the Maghreb and the Sahel. His dual Tunisian-French background also gives him a strong understanding of the Arab world, making him a distinctive voice among the Western diplomats in the Gulf. Ambassador Hajlaoui, Omani Foreign Minister Badr Abu Saidi revealed that a historic agreement was within hours of reach before Trump took his decision to bomb. Apparently, the offer that Iran made was to dilute its stock of 60% of highly enriched uranium, making it worthless as a bomb material. Now, I realise that there were a lot of other parts to this portfolio, and it was very complicated, and Iran had been dragging its feet. But the foreign minister said that if the ultimate objective was to ensure Iran can't have a nuclear bomb, I think we've cracked the problem. So, from France's point of view, was Iran's offer genuine, even though they dragged their feet? And was this military action justified?
I'll start by your last question. Was this military action needed, and can we support it? Definitely no. This is what we said publicly. This military operation is out of the international law, and we cannot endorse it in any way, and we don't see any justification, any Security Council resolution, or any situation where it requires to move that quickly to this military operation. That's our clear position on that. Now, coming back to the nuclear talks facilitated by the Omanis, yes, we saw some progress. We weren't part of these negotiations. We were not around the table. It was discussion facilitated by the Omanis between Iranians and Americans. We could imagine a larger tour de table to have this discussion, but unfortunately, this is not the choice that the Iranians and the Americans made. And we were briefed by our partners about these discussions, and we did have the impression that several elements were moving right direction. Was it enough to solve completely the nuclear file of Iran? This remains to be clarified. Let me add another thing. We cannot only focus on the nuclear file, because nuclear file, of course, is one of the most important pieces, but unfortunately, the 10, 15 years of our record now with the Iranian regime shows that we have also issues with the ballistic. We have also issues about the destabilization of the region through militias and proxies. So it's an important piece, but not the only piece. And the whole of the discussion was about how to stop this destabilizing role of Iran in the region, starting by the imminent threat of a potential nuclear program, militarized nuclear problem. Yes, Sayed Badr, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Oman, did make clear that huge progress, was made, diluting the highly enriched uranium. That's one aspect, but there are other aspects that should have been dealt with. How to dismantle the enrichment capacities in Iran, how to make sure that the inspections of IAEA come back to Iran. So lots of pieces were required really to say, yes, we are now moving another step, and we are sure that the nuclear program in Iran is fully civilian, which wasn't really clear, and which wasn't also clarified to other partners. Some elements were shared with the Director General of IAEA. Was that enough or not? It's up to them to clarify it. I think recently they came to the media and said that unfortunately it wasn't fully clear that all the requirements of the agency were there. So you see, it's definitely a progress, and we trust, of course, Sayed Badr and Oman for this genuine and sincere role. But again, we have previous experiences with Iran. Let me remind you that when this program was discovered, it was hidden at the beginning. In 2003, it was discovered. It's not Iranians that came and say, yes, we have nuclear program. It was a secret program, but then we started following it, and there were lots of discussions and first sanctions. And after the sanctions, we moved to the negotiation and to the first agreement in 2015 called JCPOA. That's the record on this file, and we are not starting from zero. And even after the signing of this agreement of 2015, at the beginning, the Iranians did fulfill for a period their commitments, and then they moved away from their commitment. And the pretext for that was that the Americans pulled out. True, Americans did pull out, but this wasn't really a good reason to go to enrichment of uranium at very, very high level, which is not civilian at all. In civilian industry of nuclear energy, you don't need more than 5% enrichment. So you see, it's a complicated file, but we definitely agree on the sincere approach and the genuine willingness of Oman to try to bridge the gap.
But Trump has pulled out of the JCPOA. Trump pulled out of the last talks in June, and Iran was attacked. Negotiations were, according to both you and also the Omanis, bearing some fruit, although obviously there had to be more that had to be discussed. Can you understand why Iran is so angry now that they've been attacked again and in this way?
Yeah, of course. When you discuss and then you are attacked, you are not very happy. And let me quote what Mr. Badr al-Busaidi said publicly. He felt a kind of dismay and disappointment of the way things are turning. That's true. We were committed to negotiation, and our public position was to stay on that track and not move to military action. So definitely, you're right. We support that way of dealing with the subject, and both in last June and now, what we saw is just the failure of this attempt to have a track of negotiation between partners, Iranians and Americans, that did not really agree on the final objective and the pace of negotiation. Probably the Iranians made some concessions, but it was very far from the expectations of the Americans. And also the Israelis were there. So the Israeli government probably pushed toward a confrontation, military confrontation that could, for them, bear fruit much easier than very complicated and lengthy negotiations. This is also something that we have to bear in mind. And the relationship between the two leadership in Israel and USA convened to go together to this fight. What Oman said publicly after the launch of the military operations was that this war is not an American war. They sent the message very clear to the Americans, saying that this is not your war. It is rather motivated by the influence of Israel. So we can hear some of these.
And you agree with that? You agree with that assessment?
It's I'm really not informed of the way the Israelis and the Americans discussed this preparation and the decision to launch the military operations. But we can just see that the momentum was pushed by the Israelis, and the Israelis did not hide at all previously that their main enemy and the main threat for them is Iran, given all the record I mentioned earlier and the threats that came from Iran for years and years, and the leadership of Iran saying that their goal is to wipe this state from the map of the region, etc. So no doubt about that.
Given your close relationship with Omani officials and the government, what insights can you share about the atmosphere in Muscat when the strikes occurred?
As I said earlier, clear disappointment and clear dismay, because it was a clear collective failure to prevent a war and to reach a peaceful agreement. This was a setback for everyone, to be honest, and I'm not sure that there were lots of happy people when the outbreak of the war was there, and the Omanis, along with many other partners like the French, etc., now even after the start of the operations and during the military operations, are still voting for sending the message of being back to a truce or a ceasefire as soon as possible to spare lives and to stop the destructions. And this is the atmosphere that we see. And also it's the feeling that the region as a whole is dragged to a very uncertain future and lots of destruction. And this region was spared now for several years. I mean, the Gulf did not experience a big war like this now for years, and unfortunately now the whole region is dragged to this violence that no one wants to continue. This is the atmosphere that we have here.
President Macron and Minister Barrot have stated that these strikes were conducted outside international law and without consulting the UN Security Council. Why is Europe not taking stronger diplomatic or economic action to restrain the US and Israel from further escalating a war that threatens the global economy, especially as if, in France's opinion, this is an illegal war?
The comparison that we hear from time to time is the comparison with 2003, the invasion of Iraq by the Americans, and you remember the strong position of France that time. We are in the similar situation now. So we consider that this operation is not lawful. It's out of the international law, as we said. But the difference is that in the case of Iraq in 2003, we did have the evidence that no weapons of mass destruction were there in Iraq. And in the case of Iran, we know that there's a nuclear program, and we know also that many elements show that this program is not merely civilian, starting by the high enriched uranium. And we know also that the Iranians did develop a massive program, a ballistic program, and did destabilize its neighbors now for years. So there are several elements of comparison, but also several huge differences between the two situations. And the last difference is that the current American administration did not go to Security Council. It did not ask for decision to go and destroy the programs in Iran. This is, of course, unfortunate. It shows how the multilateralism is having a big setback in the international community, and our American partners are part of this way of diminishing or undermining the multilateralism. And we saw it very recently by stopping their contribution to many agencies and organs of the UN, by launching alternative forums in competition with Security Council and UN. So this is a result of a whole process that started earlier, unfortunately, with the current administration. And we do not agree on that, definitely. Now, to answer your question, what are the ways to stop this? First, diplomacy and trying to talk to both sides and try to find ways to exit from this military operation. And this is what is happening now. And we are keeping sending messages to both sides and trying to find solutions. We are heading the GSAD group this year, and we are trying to find through this group some solutions to minimize and limit the economic repercussions of this war on the world economy, not only on the region and on Europe. And one of the initiatives that we have launched recently is this idea of coalition, international coalition, to make sure that the freedom of navigation in the Gulf is guaranteed for everyone. And this is something that is being negotiated with our partners. It doesn't mean that we are stepping in and taking part as war party. I mean, as belligerent in the war. Not at all. What we try to do is to gather more forces, mobilize more forces in the international level, and to go together to try to make sure that freedom of navigation is guaranteed and that trade is resuming again, and to prevent this huge international economic crisis that is looming. If
can I just step in there?
Please.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you a question just on the Strait of Hormuz. This is becoming now the front line. I mean, Iran said that if it was attacked, it would close the Strait of Hormuz. It said so repeatedly, even before this war started. France is now deploying the Charles de Gaulle and other warships to escort ships in the region. But there's a very fine line in this tinderbox between escorting and actually being a combatant in the front line. Yeah. And we must have seen there were tweets that were deleted by the Americans saying we've escorted a ship through, and then they of course deleted that tweet. At the moment, Iran has got control. America's Marines are on the way. This is becoming a very, very hot area, and the dividing line between escorting ships and actually participating in the war or being a target of Iranian missiles and then having to defend yourself and then reply is very, very thin. How do you ensure that French forces I entirely accept that you have a genuine motivation to stop the war, and your position is quite different from America or Israel. But how do you ensure that French forces aren't dragged into the wider conflict?
The objective is precisely to not be dragged to being combated or being involved in any way in this war. Let me just correct one thing. The aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle is not moving to the Hormuz Strait area, is not intended to escort the shipping ships, and it's not at all the plan. The deployment of the Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier in the Eastern Mediterranean, not in the Gulf, the Eastern Mediterranean area was related to the security and the reassurance messages that we wanted to send to our partners in this region. I remind you that EU member state Cyprus was targeted by the Iranians, and also NATO member Turkey was targeted. So our presence there is to reassure our partners there and to be close also to the operations in Lebanon, where we have also an evolving situation and very tense military operations. And let me also remind one thing, which is not well known by the public, which is the previous operations we did have in the past. Early 24, we launched a Navy operation called Aspides. It's EU mission, and this operation had aimed at escorting and making sure that in the Red Sea navigation continues. And this operation is still there. So we are not starting from scratch. We are having already a certain experience in the region. And the idea is to make it wider and to find the way together to exit from this deadlock that we have, the blocking that we have now in the Strait of Hormuz, provided that we have a ceasefire or truce. So the navigation liberty guarantees would follow the truce or the ceasefire. They are not going to go and impose on the ground, on the waters, the navigation. We are not going to escort a French ship or Italian or whatever, or Chinese, and fire if the Iranians target this ship. This is not what we is discussed now. Sorry, the idea is to talk to all the contenders, neighbors in Asia, for example, that have an interest of the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. China, Japan, South Korea, India, and also European countries, plus the GCC countries themselves, of course, that are exporting their oil and gas through this corridor, and to agree together how to monitor and make sure on the ground that navigation is free and not hampered or targeted by the Iranians. Can we do it while the military operations are being carried? The answer is no, we cannot. So it can be a step immediately after a truce or ceasefire. And of course, we can rely on partners like Oman, who have open channels with the Iranians, to make sure that the confliction mechanisms are there in terms of reference of the presence of the international coalition is clear to not be seen as hostile by the Iranians, which is not. Actually, this is not at least what we intended to be.
Yeah, I think that you've just made a very important point. I think people misunderstood, I think, as the French statement that you were going to escort ships. Can I also ask you, the conflict is expanding day by day. It's the Strait of Hormuz, there's Karg Island, there's the possibility of hitting oil reserves, but also desalination plants. A desalination plant was hit in Iran. It's not clear by whom. There are all sorts of rumours. The UAE denied hitting it, but Israel said they didn't hit it. But given that the Gulf states rely on these plants for up to 90% of their drinking water, how concerned is France about a potential humanitarian catastrophe? What is Paris doing to enforce international laws protecting civilian infrastructure?
The first thing to say about that, it is totally forbidden to anyone to target civilian facilities. And water desalination plants are probably the most symbolic ones, because we are talking about drinking water for populations living in desertic countries. So it is very, very vital to keep that facilities working, and no reason to target them. We cannot consider these targets as military in any way. That's the first principle, and this applies to everyone, the Americans, the Israelis, and the Iranians. So that's the principle, and we have to stick to it. And any violation of this principle will require that the author of these actions or these strikes have to be held accountable for it later. This is what we can say. Now, on the ground, what we can do is to activate our military agreements with our partners in the region and try to protect them, because we are not absent from the scene. We are present. We have several bases and assets and corporations going on with our Gulf partners. And these agreements require that we provide assistance and to be present to defend our partners. And this is what we just doing. And our posture is totally defensive. We do not hit anyone, neither the Iranians nor the other neighbors. We just contribute significantly to defending our partners that have asked for that, following the existing agreements. This posture is motivated by the need to protect all their facilities, desalination plants, also airports, and many other facilities that need to be protected, because this region will end this military period, we hope, as early as possible, and there's no justification at all to target civilian facilities and civilian populations.
Can I ask you, Ambassador, about the sort of atmosphere in the Gulf? It's really being battered. It played no part in provoking Iran in any way. There's quite a lot of damage in Dubai and all around the Gulf to civilian targets, not just military ones. Has the West lost the trust of the GCC, and do Gulf leaders now view the Western military bases as a liability that risks their stability rather than a protective shield? What's the atmosphere like in the Gulf at the moment?
You're right. There's a feeling of bitterness. I can understand that some of our friends in the Gulf can feel bitter about what is happening, but this bitterness and this feeling is not directed to the West or to the French or other parties. It is first directed to the Iranians, because let me remind you, if we go 20 or 30 years ago, we did experience in the past how these countries were targeted by their neighboring Iranian partner. I remember in Saudi Arabia how they tried to destabilize the eastern part where Shia minorities are living. I remember how the pilgrimage was disrupted, and people supported by Iranians went there and demonstrated during the pilgrimage itself, and later how the militias surrounding Saudi Arabia, especially in Yemen, did fire on the Saudi soil armed and supported by the Iranians. So this is not the only case, unfortunately, but the dismay and the bitterness was due to the fact that during the recent years, the 6 countries of GCC made huge effort really to reach out to the Iranians. You remember this agreement brokered by the Chinese in 2023, and we thought that really Iran was in a settled approach with its partners and neighbors, and too much interests in economic and human, social, etc., were involved to resume a war or an aggression in them. Fortunately, we were mistaken, and we were collectively mistaken, and we saw how Iran started by striking its neighbors to retaliate after the launch of the military operation by US and Israel, and for the West and the French. Let me talk about the French. Unfortunately, we see the opposite feeling. We see gratitude and trust of our commitment to security in the region. Unlike what many are saying, we are not having huge interests in terms of oil and gas, etc. We are not a big importer of oil and gas from this region. Of course, we have economic ties in many sectors, but we have commitment to the security of these countries through agreement that I mentioned earlier. And when they were activated, we responded present, and we are taking our part of the defense of these countries. So I'm not sure that the Emiratis, the Qataris, etc., are holding us for a source of insecurity. It's just the opposite. And the Iranians are now seen as the big brother, neighboring brother that is just attacking his neighboring brothers because he was shot or shelled by the Americans and the Israelis.
If Trump is unclear or has zigzagged about his motives for attacking Iran, and he's mentioned several of them, the nuclear file, but also regime change. He's also said help is on the way to the Iranian protesters who were killed in their tens of thousands in January. If Trump is unclear, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel is not. He wants regime change. He's talked about splitting Iran into ethnic groups because an independent Iran is the last obstacle to his dream of a greater Israel. An Israel with an alliance. He talked about the hexagon of states that would support Israel's hegemony. Do you agree that an Israel which is not just trying to defend its borders but expand them and expand military control of the Arab and Persian world is an inherent threat to the stability of the region?
We totally agree on the fact that occupying territories illegally by Israel is unacceptable, and this is something that we said in many times, and we tried to push forward several processes, starting by the state of the two-state solution recently in the conference in New York last July and last September in 2 conferences. So we are very committed to that, and we do not accept this idea of having an entity, Israel or another country in the region, expanding and occupying territories of its neighbors. This is totally unacceptable, of course. Now, coming back to your first question about the targets and the goals of this war, it remains very unclear, as you said very justly earlier. We saw at the beginning that the regime change, one of the ultimate targets by the Americans. Then the Israelis also confirmed it, and the Americans walked away from this objective, and we expect, unfortunately, that this goal not only that is not legitimate, as I said earlier. We do not believe that regime has to be determined by the foreign partners. It has to be determined by the sovereign people of that country, in this case, Iran. And we don't even expect this to be helpful for anyone, starting by Israel itself, because having more fragmentation in the area, this would lead to more unrest, more instability, and we saw it actually in Syria. We saw it also in Libya.
Yes, they want to fragment Syria. Yes, exactly.
We saw that the fragmentation leads to more spread of violence, to more militias in the neighboring countries, and more unrest in general. So is it the interest of Israel to have that? Definitely no, I don't believe that. I believe that the Israelis need a settled and secure and peaceful neighborhood rather than a fragmented and militarized neighborhood. This is not in any way the interest of Israel. And of course, it is a huge catastrophe for the Gulf countries that did not ask for that did just oppose this option of attacking, waging a war, and leading to fragmentation of Iran, which is not there, by the way. Some are already talking about the fragmentation of Iran. It is a threat, it is a risk, but we cannot say today that Iran is divided into three pieces or fragmented between different ethnicities.
Talking about Palestine, the New York Declaration, co-chaired by France, explicitly rejected any territorial reduction or occupation of Gaza. With the US administration seemingly not taking any action to restrain Israel, is France concerned that the international community has abandoned the Palestinians? What is Paris doing to prevent the permanent annexation of the Palestinian territories?
There are many things that we can do, not only as French, but Europeans, along with our Arab partners, to prevent this annexation that is made possible by the policies of the Israeli government. First, to say it clearly and to rally and to have more support worldwide. This is what we did have in New York conference, and the New York Declaration was supported by a very big number of partners in the world. And let me remind you that not only France did recognize the Palestinian state to make it irreversible, but also 10 other countries that joined France, and among them UK, Canada, Australia, so really significant countries on the international scene. And it's not nothing. It was really move forward. And the aim behind all this operation was to make sure that whatever the territory situation is, whatever the operations of annexations here and there, the solution has to be kept as two states living side by side, Israel and Palestine, and territory discussions have to be held. And I'm optimistic, and I hope that one day we will go back to the negotiation table and to have a discussion on the territories. But of course, the annexation cannot be recognized. We do not recognize the next territories as Israelis. And of course, there are processes of sanctions and discussions within the EU, etc., on how to deal with the projects that are coming from Israel, how to adjust the economic ties that we are having with Israel, given this situation that is unacceptable, of course.
The UK and Canada and other allies have imposed direct sanctions on far-right Israeli ministers like Itamar Ben-Gvir or Bezalel Smotrich for inciting violence in the West Bank. France has previously threatened concrete actions and targeted sanctions. But why hasn't Paris joined its allies in sanctioning these specific Israeli leaders? And what is the threshold for France to act?
I'm not an expert of the sanctions, but I'm almost sure that the list of settlers and violent leaders in occupied territories, mainly West Bank and also in Gaza. A list was agreed at the EU level, and France endorsed it. I don't have the specific memory of that, but I am quite convinced that it was done, and France did support it. So really, no discussion about the need for us to stop all the violence advocates and to deter them and to punish them if needed, if really crimes are committed. So on the principle...
But nevertheless, the situation is, and this is not a question directed at France, but to all the people, all the countries who've recognized the Palestinian state. It gives everyone a warm glow, but actually it doesn't change what's happening on the ground. Are you worried by that? Are you worried that you just don't have the levers? Or do we have the levers and we're not using them?
Yeah, I'm sure that the government of Palestine, the state of Palestine, did see the importance of receiving that recognition from partners like France, UK, Canada, etc. So it is a step forward. Is it the end of the conflict? Unfortunately, no, when we see it. Are there other steps to go? Yes, we are working with the Palestinians and on how to adjust their legal arsenal, their constitution, their government, even their economy, etc. There are many other things that we are working on. The statehood is not just being recognized as a state by the other partners. It's also other elements that are required to be fully recognized. And we are working with our Palestinian friends on all of this. Now, for our capacity as international community to impose solutions on the ground, as you know, the international game is not governed by one single force that has its army and imposes on the ground a solution, as it can happen in domestic affairs, for example. It's unfortunately a bit different, but the Palestinians do have capacities, given their recognize the wider recognition of their state, legal ones going to international courts and having more support from the international community. This is what we see, and this is what's happening. Does it prevent all the operations of settlers and occupations? Unfortunately, no. But I'm sure also that not having recognition of a state wouldn't prevent neither. See, so
coming back to the current war, which just appears to be growing in scale. And in geography and in contours and also intensity. Iran hasn't waved the white flag. Can you shed any insight into the efforts that France is making for a ceasefire? President Macron recently spoke to the Iranian president. France has reportedly offered ceasefire proposals alongside China and Russia, which Tehran rejected. Can you give us some insight into how you think this war is going to end?
Right. President Macron talks to President Pezeshkian. That's true. That's accurate. Also, Minister Barrot talks to his counterparts in Iran. And we are probably among the very, very few countries in the world that are able to talk to Iranians and also a very high level and directly and bluntly to the Americans and Israelis. And to have the trust of both partners, are a reliable partner, even if with Iran, of course, we have some difficult records in the past. Is it accurate that France did propose a peace plan, a ceasefire plan? I cannot confirm this. I saw that in the media, but I'm not sure this is really the reality. But we are talking with our different partners about some parameters that can help exiting this violent military operation that we have. And among these parameters, of course, we have the security of navigation in the Hormuz Strait I mentioned earlier, but also how to discuss the security of the neighbors of Iran, how to prevent Iran from attacking its neighbors. This is the discussion, the kind of discussion that we are having now, and this is, I think, the way France can be useful for the current period.
But are you worried? You're a career diplomat, and you've had a lot of deep experience in the Sahel and in Africa, and with terrorism. Are you worried by the fact that, as one Israeli official said, we didn't have proper goals, and therefore we can't get into negotiations because we don't know whether these goals are being met or not. And so much of this is about Trump's ego, about having an off-ramp, about being seen to be triumphant. And this is very far from the very detailed and painstaking work that diplomats like you stitch together a complicated peace agreement. Are you worried that the war is out of control?
The war would be out of control if we have other actors stepping in and fighting Iran, for example. Let me observe that many countries in the neighborhood of Iran were attacked, targeted, but did not retaliate. They kept defending themselves and restrained from attacking back the Iranians, which is a remarkable thing. And this prevents the war from spreading more and being wider than it is currently. But of course, there's a risk, because if the Iranians continue targeting its neighbors, it's going to be complicated to tell them, no, please continue restraining. So it's a real risk. So the first message is to stop the military operations in general, and for the Iranians to not target their neighbors who did not attack them. This is my first answer on the scope of the conflict, and on the need to go back to political process. Yes, we need it, and the fact that the war wasn't built on very clear targets from the beginning makes it complicated from one side. This is the statement that you quoted earlier, but it gives some facilities to the Americans, for example, because they can end the operations whenever they want. Usually you stop your military operations when your targets are met or reached, or because you are defeated, or because you reach an agreement with your contender. In this case, no way to have an immediate agreement with the Iranians. At least the Iranians are not shown any ability and willingness to move forward on that. The Americans are not really lacking capacities. They have many capacities to deploy and to put in the region. But we don't have very clear targets. Or let's say we have changing targets. And this allows the American administration to come and to say, we consider that our targets are met and we reached all what we wanted to do, and we're going to stop there. We saw it last June. Last June, they decided unilaterally that they have destroyed all what they wanted to destroy. We discovered later that it wasn't the case, but it doesn't matter. They said it publicly and they stopped the operations. They can reiterate this in the current period, and it will depend on the situation on the ground, of course, in Iran, their bilateral relation with Israel and requirements of the Israelis, and the threat that the Israelis are feeling or not, and the targets of the Israelis, and also probably the international pressure, the economic crisis, and the domestic also pressure that can occur in the U.S. So it is a mixed blessing, let's say, this lack of clarity of objectives. It can make it complicated for a peace talk later, but also it can make it easier for the Americans to build a scenario of success and exit the war.
Well, a final question. I mean, the Marines are on their way. I mean, how dangerous is it if the U.S. troops attempted a landing on Iranian soil?
If the war that started by air, by bombing, etc., moves to land occupation or land operation, this, of course, would be a game changer, a very big game change. And it also depends on the scale of this operation. If you have a very small operation on land just to seize a position or to do a specific, to reach a specific goal and go away, it's not like to occupy a whole region and have position with the logistic support and a very heavy requirement of military equipment and military support. So it will definitely be a game changer, but it depends on the scale, and this would be a total shift in the narrative of the American administration. Let me remind you that the Americans from the beginning, and this administration from the beginning, said that they won't go to this kind of lengthy wars, endless wars that were waged by the previous administration, and they would just reach their goals by very specific interventions by air, etc., and not occupying the land of other countries, and not reiterating the mistakes that did have in Iraq, for example, and Afghanistan. So that would be a total shift, and in my personal opinion, an incredible risk, political risk from the American administration.
So your biggest hope is that Trump basically just gives up, that he declares victory and walks away?
That would be that would spare lots of destruction. You know, ending the war is always a good thing to do, and that would spare lives, that would spare destructions, and also that would lead to kind of landing of this military tension that we have, because there would be no argument for the Iranians to continue targeting their neighbors, for example. So that would be a first step. And is it enough? Is it the only thing that we can hope for? No, we have to build on that. If the Americans decide to go away, walk away from the military operations, we have also to see the Israelis stop their operations, also on the proxy, on Hezbollah, etc., try to ease things there, and to be back in a situation where no fights, no drones, no missiles are launched in this region, and try to rebuild trust and deploy this coalition to safeguard the navigation in the region and re-impel the machine, the international economy, etc., and build trust again. And ultimately, we have to have discussions. So with the Iranians are going to be there, whatever the regime is going to be, and we have to have discussion. And this region, the Gulf region, has to live with them as neighbors and the most peacefully possible.
So you believe that France could reopen the door to diplomacy that Oman championed?
France can take part as an international partner in the attempts of going back to a negotiation table and going back to a peaceful situation and stopping the war.
Sorry, just to rephrase that question, the door to diplomacy, that still exists. It hasn't been blown up, and it's still potentially open, in your expert view, to functioning again. It can be opened again.
Yeah, definitely. You know, even during the war, messages are sent. not necessarily directly, etc., but messages are sent, and we see more now messages sent publicly, unfortunately, and on the social media, etc. But diplomats are still there. People are talking to each other. Facilitators are around, and many people have an interest in stopping the war. As partner, international actor, member of the Security Council, we are of course committed to push that solution because, as I said earlier, we do not consider that the solution can come from this military operation.
Ambassador, thank you so much for answering my questions, and that was a fascinating interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you.